The wind sliced through the empty street like a whisper of long-forgotten memories, rattling the broken shutters of the abandoned house at the end of the lane. He sat there, a lone figure on cracked concrete, ears alert, eyes scanning the shadows that clung to the corners like specters. The smell of damp earth and decayed wood hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of rust from the gate hinges. He didn't move for hours, though every sound, the distant howl of a stray, the soft patter of rain beginning to fall, stirred something deep inside him. His coat, once glossy, was now dull and flecked with dust. His body, once strong, was weary yet poised, as if he were guarding not just the house but something invisible within its walls. People had passed by, hurried along, eyes averted. But he remained, steadfast, silent, tethered to memories he couldn't quite shake. And when the first streaks of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the crumbling bricks gold, he lifted his nose to the wind. And the softest sigh slipped past his lips, a sound that carried loyalty, sorrow, and an unspoken plea to whoever might finally see him. Show your love, hit like, share, and subscribe for more. The morning air was sharp and brittle, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and earth that had been long untouched. He sat on the cracked concrete of the front yard, the ruins of the abandoned house looming behind him like a dark sentinel. Each brick, chipped and crumbling, whispered secrets of a life that had been vibrant once, now reduced to silence and decay. The windows were shattered, jagged shards catching the pale dawn light and splintering it into shards across the dust-laden floor inside. The wooden door hung crooked on its rusted hinges, moaning softly with each passing gust, as though it too mourned the absence of those who had once called this place home. He shifted slightly, muscles rippling under his matted fur, but he did not rise. His loyalty was immovable, tethered to the house, to memories that stretched far beyond the years, beyond the neglect, beyond the loneliness. Rain had fallen during the night, leaving the world slick and darkened, and a thin mist curled from the earth like a restless spirit. He sniffed the air carefully, nostrils flaring, catching the faintest hints of life. Rats on the walls, a distant crow, a human scent that had been there earlier, now gone. His ears twitched at every sound, small noises magnified by the echoing emptiness. Each creak of the broken door, each rattle of the loose window frames, each sigh of wind through the ruined roof was a language he understood, a code he had memorized over countless solitary nights. This house, this place was all he had. Yet it was not comforting. It was a mausoleum, a place where memories waited like ghosts in the corners. He remembered her, though the memory was jagged like broken glass pressing into his mind. Her voice soft yet commanding, calling him from across the yard, the scent of her hands as she stroked his fur, the warmth of her presence like sunlight pouring over his back. She had been gone for years, vanished in ways he could not comprehend, and the house had become a monument to her absence. People had come and gone in the neighborhood, glancing with curiosity or fear at the large German shepherd who refused to leave his post, but none had lingered. None had tried to cross the invisible barrier of grief and loyalty that surrounded him. He did not bark, did not approach. He simply waited, eyes steady, breath measured, every instinct attuned to the possibility, faint though it was, that someone might return. The ground beneath his paws was cold and rough, littered with shards of brick, splinters of wood, and the occasional rusted nail. Each step he had taken over the years had left faint impressions in the soil, footprints that would disappear with the next rain, ephemeral as memory itself. Still he stayed. The wind carried stories from far-off streets, laughter, the slam of doors, children chasing each other in sunlight, and he listened to them as one might listen to a dream, familiar yet out of reach. He had learned to find comfort in small, private rituals, curling beneath the awning when rain fell, resting his muzzle on the warm concrete, warmed by the morning sun, watching the shadows stretch across the house as time passed without interruption. Yet today felt different. There was a weight in the air, heavier than the usual solitude, a subtle trembling in the mist that set his fur on end. He raised his head and sniffed the breeze, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. The scent of another human lingered faintly, almost imperceptibly, carried from down the street. It was not the scent of those who had hurried past, avoiding his gaze. It was softer, gentler, as though whoever it belonged to approached with caution and care. His heart, worn with years of silent vigil, gave a small, involuntary flicker of hope. Could this be the one who would see him? The one who would understand? He did not move yet, only observed, eyes narrowing, every muscle taut, ready for any sudden turn of events. The house itself seemed to breathe in response. The roof sagged further under its own weight, the walls cracked and leaning, and the air smelled of rot and dust. Yet there was a strange beauty in the decay, a quiet symmetry in the way nature was reclaiming what humans had abandoned. Moss had begun to crawl along the northern wall. Small wildflowers sprouted through the broken cement, and a lone tree leaned its skeletal branches over the yard, casting fractured shadows that danced with the morning light. He lifted a paw and placed it carefully on the cold ground, testing the rhythm of his own heartbeat against the slow, steady pulse of the world waking around him. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint warmth and a hint of unfamiliar presence, and his chest tightened. This had been a life defined by waiting, by endurance, by loyalty untested and unseen. Yet even in the deepest trenches of loneliness, instinct whispered that change might be near. Memories surged unbidden, waves crashing over him with no warning. He remembered the first time she had left, the fear in her eyes as she vanished down the street, the way he had chased her until he could no longer see her, the ache in his chest when her scent disappeared entirely. Nights had been the hardest. The darkness pressed in, filling his ears with imagined voices, shadows with imagined forms. He had learned to be still, to silence his panic, to survive on hope alone. Hunger, cold, pain, none of these had broken. Only absence had been the true tormentor, a relentless, gnawing emptiness that seeped into bone and memory alike. Now, with the sun beginning to crest the horizon, scattering amber light over broken bricks and wet concrete, he felt something shift. A distant bark, sharp and tentative, reached him through the haze of early morning. His ears flicked, head lifted, and he focused on the sound. Not just a sound, but a signal, a ripple in the fabric of his carefully ordered solitude. He rose slowly, every joint stiff, every muscle tense yet poised. The wind carried new scents now, leather, human sweat, rainwater, and the faintest trace of curiosity. His eyes, golden and liquid with unspoken emotion, fixed on the road ahead, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if perhaps, finally, he would not wait alone. He took a careful step forward, then another, paws pressing into the softened earth. The house loomed behind him, silent and watching, a witness to every act of loyalty, every moment of grief, every heartbeat of hope that had kept him tethered to the past. And as the mist swirled around his legs and the first full rays of sunlight touched his coat, he paused. His gaze lifted to the horizon, where shadows still lingered but light had begun to carve a path through the darkness. The world had not yet returned to him, but the first tremors of change had arrived, delicate and undeniable, and he, steadfast and unbroken, waited to meet it. In the stillness, he lowered himself back onto the cold concrete, tail brushing the cracked floorboards, ears twitching at every distant sound, eyes scanning every corner. He was alone, but not defeated. The abandoned house behind him remained a silent fortress of memory, yet the dawn promised a beginning. Somewhere beyond the reach of this quiet street, something was coming, and he, the guardian of shadows, the witness of absence, the embodiment of undying loyalty, would be ready. His chest rose and fell, each breath a quiet hymn to survival, to hope, to the possibility of connection. The wind whispered through the broken windows, and he tilted his head, listening, waiting, alive. The morning had settled into a quiet rhythm, the mist lifting slowly from the damp earth, leaving behind a fragile clarity that seemed almost unreal. The abandoned house, usually swallowed by shadows, now caught flecks of sunlight that sifted through the broken roof and jagged windows, splintering gold across the cracked floorboards. He remained in his usual post, tail curled around his legs, ears angled toward the faintest whisper of movement. For years, this spot had been both fortress and prison, a place where the world could touch him only in fragments, sound, scent, wind, but never fully. Today, however, the air carried something different, a human scent, soft, hesitant, yet undeniably deliberate, wafted along the street. It was not hurried, not the kind that fled from him with fear. This one lingered cautious and tentative, a ripple in the pattern of his long, endless solitude. His head lifted, ears pricking, nostrils flaring as he traced the scent along the cracked concrete and through the skeletal branches of the lone tree that leaned over the yard. The figure appeared slowly, almost ghost-like, carrying the weight of uncertainty and the faintest trace of hope. A woman, perhaps wrapped in a damp jacket, steps careful, measuring each movement. Her eyes, wide with something between fear and fascination, took in the ruins of the house and the stillness of the dog. She stopped at the edge of the yard, shoulders stiff, hands twitching slightly as though unsure what to do with them. And then she spoke, the sound almost swallowed by the wind, a fragile thread attempting to bridge the distance. "Hey, there!" Her voice wavered, soft but steady, a gentle vibration that seemed to ripple through the air and stir the dog's long-dormant instincts. He remained motionless, not out of defiance but calculation, reading every subtle gesture, the tilt of her head, the shifting weight of her feet, the rhythm of her breath. For years he had been trained to observe, to protect, to respond only when the moment demanded. Now instinct warred with memory and hope, a strange unfamiliar sensation that tightened his chest and sent a subtle shiver along his spine. He took a step forward, paw lifting slowly from the ground, then paused. A soft breeze carried her scent again, mingled with wet leaves and faint perfume, and he felt the tug of curiosity entwined with caution. The woman crouched, lowering herself slightly, hands outstretched in a gesture meant to soothe. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, eyes flicking between him and the house as though seeking permission from both. Her presence was cautious, but her voice carried warmth, a balm on years of solitude. He shifted, tail brushing the wet concrete, muscles tense, but he did not retreat. Something in her, the softness, the patience, the unspoken plea to be seen, stirred a memory buried beneath dust and decay. He remembered hands once gentle on his back, a voice that had called him home, the echo of loyalty, buried deep in muscle and bone, tugged at him. Slowly he stepped forward, each movement deliberate, eyes never leaving her face. Step by step, the distance between isolation and connection shrank, measured not in words but in gestures, glances, and shared breaths. Each step carried weight, each movement a negotiation between instinct and longing. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath layers of memory, fear, and endurance, a spark of hope ignited, a flicker of life that could not be denied. By mid-morning, he had accepted her presence as part of the yard's rhythm, her voice a soft background hum against the wind, her hands a balm against the ache of memory. The abandoned house, once a monument to absence, seemed to breathe in tandem with them, shadows retreating from the corners, light stretching over broken bricks and moss-covered walls. He remained watchful, yet not alone, a silent sentinel on the precipice between grief and renewal, guarding the past while leaning into the fragile, tentative future she offered. And as she spoke softly again, offering a tentative smile, he lifted his head to meet her eyes, golden gaze holding a quiet, profound acknowledgement. He was ready to take the first step into a world that had once abandoned him, a world that now seemed impossibly welcoming. The days blurred into a slow, deliberate rhythm, each one a quiet negotiation between past pain and tentative hope. He began to anticipate her arrival before she appeared, ears twitching at the faintest footstep, nose raised to catch the scent of her presence before it fully touched the yard. The abandoned house, once a mausoleum of silence, now hummed with subtle life, the soft scrape of paws on concrete, the muted patter of boots over puddles, the distant hum of conversation that belonged to a world he had long stopped expecting to be part of. He remained cautious, muscles coiled beneath his coat, but something inside him, something he had thought buried in dust and shadows, stirred with each approach. She arrived one damp morning, carrying a small bundle of blankets, her movements careful and deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile rules he had set. He watched from his usual post, eyes sharp, yet there was a new undercurrent, curiosity intertwined with the vigilance of years. When she knelt and spread the blankets in a patch of sunlight, her fingers brushing wet leaves aside, he stepped forward slowly, paws sinking slightly into the soft soil. He sniffed the offered warmth, hesitated, then lowered his body, accepting the gesture without fear. In that small, deliberate act, an invisible bridge began to form, spanning the gulf of years that had separated him from touch, trust, and companionship. The yard became a space of quiet rituals. She spoke softly, almost to herself at first, narrating the mundane as if to coax life back into his world. "It's all right, you can come closer," she murmured, fingers extending but never forcing, voice a gentle river winding through the canyon of his solitude. At first he followed cautiously, tail tucked, ears flicking at every sound, eyes darting toward every shadow. Gradually, however, He allowed her presence to seep into the rhythm of his world, an echo of trust reverberating in his chest. Her hands brushed against his coat, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence, each touch a wordless promise of care and understanding. The abandoned house itself seemed to respond. Sunlight filtered through broken panes, painting shifting patterns across the walls and floor, highlighting dust motes that danced lazily in the warmth. Moss crept further across the northern wall, tiny green sparks against the gray decay, and the smell of damp earth mingled with the faint sweetness of early blooms sprouting between cracks in the concrete. The environment became an active participant in their shared story, reflecting the subtle shifts in his heart. From vigilance to cautious openness, from isolation to hesitant companionship. He began to follow her when she moved, each step measured, muscles tense but willing, a dance of trust that required no words. She learned his signals, the flick of an ear, the tightening of a jaw, the subtle shift of weight, and responded with patience. When he veered too close to danger, a sharp voice or gentle nudge redirected him. When he lingered in hesitation, she waited, silent and watchful, allowing him to choose. It was a slow, deliberate negotiation, the language of loyalty and trust unfolding in every shared breath, every glance, every careful step across puddles and broken concrete. Food became more than sustenance. It was a ritual of connection. She brought fresh water each morning, small meals prepared with care, placing bowls at a distance and letting him decide when to approach. He sniffed, circled, hesitated, and finally ate, eyes never leaving her face. Each meal was a small act of communion, a testament to the slow unspooling of barriers that had taken years to build. He remembered hunger, yes, but also remembered the ache of absence, and now learned that filling that hunger with trust was far more profound than anything eaten from a bowl. One evening, as the sun dipped low and spilled molten gold across the yard, he found himself lying beside her on the spread blankets, tail brushing her hand, head resting near her knee. The wind rustled the skeletal branches of the lone tree, and the house seemed to breathe with them, shadows stretching across the cracked walls like old memories. She spoke softly, recounting stories from a life he could not fully understand, her words weaving warmth into the cold, hollow corners of his world. He listened, eyes half closed, ears flicking at each subtle change in tone, each inflection carrying meaning beyond comprehension. In the quiet intimacy of shared presence, he began to understand that trust was not a single act, but a mosaic of small, consistent gestures, patience, kindness, consistency, and above all, presence. The nights remained the hardest. Darkness pressed against the edges of the yard, shadows stretching like memories that refused to die. Occasionally, distant noises startled him. A door slamming somewhere far away, the bark of a stray dog, the rustle of leaves. But she remained a steady warmth nearby, voice soft, hand resting on his back in silent reassurance. Slowly, the tension in his muscles began to ease, and he allowed himself the luxury of rest, trusting, if only momentarily, that she would remain. Sleep, once a fraught and vulnerable act, became a shared ritual, a quiet testament to the fragile power of connection. He learned to play again, in the most subdued way, chasing leaves blown by the wind, nudging twigs along the cracked concrete, circling the blankets she spread for him. Each act was both a test and a gesture, an exploration of the boundaries between freedom and safety, independence and companionship. Okay. She laughed softly when he startled at his own reflection in a puddle, and he tilted his head, ears twitching, trying to reconcile this new, unpredictable world with the one he had inhabited for so long. The sound of laughter, gentle and unforced, became a balm on old wounds. A reminder that joy could exist even in spaces once defined solely by absence. Over time, he began to trust more than her presence. He began to trust possibility itself. The abandoned house, once a cage of memory, now felt like a canvas waiting for new stories to be etched into its crumbling walls. Shadows still lingered, yes, and the past could never be fully erased, but light and warmth began to permeate the spaces he had long abandoned. He would linger at corners, nose lifted, ears pricked, listening not for echoes of loss, but for hints of life, of change, of hope. Each step closer to her, each brush of her hand against his fur was a victory. A small, quiet triumph over the years of fear, grief, and solitude that had shaped him. And in the quiet moments between action and rest, he allowed himself to reflect, not with words, for he had none, but in the language of stillness, gaze, and heartbeat. He remembered the absence of family, the echoes of lost voices, the ache of waiting alone. Yet he also felt the stirrings of something new, a fragile, delicate, and persistent hope. Trust, once foreign and frightening, had become a thread woven into every gesture, every glance, every breath shared with her. And for the first time in a long, lonely life, he understood that being seen, truly seen, was a gift more profound than survival itself. The days continued, each one a layer added to the mosaic of trust. She arrived quietly, without expectation. He responded cautiously, without surrender. Together, they moved through the yard, around puddles, beneath broken trees, past shattered windows, discovering that companionship could exist even amidst ruin. The house, silent witness to his solitude, seemed to approve in its own way. The sunlight catching dust motes in golden streams, shadows shifting just enough to soften jagged corners, and the air itself carrying a faint promise of renewal. He had learned patience, endurance, and vigilance, but above all, he had begun to learn that vulnerability, when met with care, could blossom into connection. And as the sun dipped fully below the horizon one evening, casting the yard in a muted amber glow, he lay beside her once more, tail brushing her fingers, ears relaxed, body loose. He had learned to trust not because it was safe, but because the act of trusting itself was an act of courage, a declaration that the past did not have to define the future. Somewhere deep in the rhythm of his heartbeat, a quiet melody played, an echo of trust, a flicker of life, a whisper of hope that had been nurtured slowly, patiently, across countless days of observation, hesitation, and small, deliberate gestures. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he felt at peace, not complete, not fully free, but alive in a way that transcended mere survival. He had discovered the delicate, quiet power of connection, the extraordinary significance of being seen, and the profound resonance of trust earned, not demanded. And as night descended fully, wrapping the yard in shadow, he lifted his gaze toward the house, then back at her, and allowed himself a long, slow exhale. The weight of years momentarily lifted. For the first time in years, he did not wait alone. The afternoon sky had darkened slowly, clouds swelling with the weight of impending storm, as if the world itself had sensed the tension building within the abandoned yard. The air, heavy and electric, carried the scent of rain-soaked earth and ozone, a tangible prelude to chaos. He paced along the cracked concrete, tail low, ears flicked sharply at every distant sound, body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The soft patter of distant rain began to fall, faint at first, then gradually thickening, drumming on the roof and pooling in the jagged cracks of the yard. His eyes, sharp and liquid with focus, scanned the horizon, alert for threats both visible and invisible. After weeks of fragile trust, the world seemed poised to test them in ways neither he nor the human could anticipate. She was kneeling near the collapsed porch, tying her bootlaces, oblivious to the sudden shift in the air, and he's immediately on high alert. Something in the sudden tension of his muscles, the low rumble vibrating in his chest, signals the invisible danger. A shadow moved along the street. A man, tall, shoulders hunched, carrying the weight of intent that made the hair along the dog's spine rise. He barked once, a low, rumbling warning, chest vibrating with instinctive authority. The man paused, then quickened his step, and the dog's growl deepened, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the yard like the pulse of the storm itself. The human looked up, startled, and for a fleeting moment, fear flickered in her eyes. She froze, unsure, trusting him to interpret the danger she could not yet see. The man came closer, stride deliberate, hands tucked inside pockets, as if hiding intent. The rain fell harder now, soaking the broken yard, drenching both dog and woman, turning soil to mud beneath paws and boots. The dog moved in front of her, body low, hackles raised, teeth bared in a silent promise of protection. Instinct, memory, and loyalty fused into a single focused purpose, to defend the fragile life beside him. He did not hesitate. Years of guarding, years of enduring, years of waiting had built this moment, and he was ready. The stranger stepped into the yard, eyes narrowing, taking measure of the large German shepherd who stood unwavering in front of a smaller, vulnerable human. Words were exchanged, harsh, questioning, threatening, but they were muffled by the intensity of the storm and the protective force radiating from the dog. Each flash of lightning illuminated tense muscles, eyes locked in unyielding focus. The rain fell in sheets now, stinging like shards of ice against fur and skin. Yet the dog did not flinch, did not waver. Every muscle, Every heartbeat, every flick of his ears and shift of weight conveyed a singular truth. Nothing would pass this boundary without consequence. Suddenly, the man lunged, a reckless, clumsy motion, more driven by desperation than skill, and the dog surged forward, a living force of loyalty and instinct. Rain plastered fur to muscle, water running into his eyes, but the clarity of purpose was undimmed. Teeth snapped in warning, a growl tearing from his chest like thunder, rolling across the sky. She gasped, stepping back, wet hair plastered to her face, but he did not break formation. He intercepted every movement, guided by the invisible thread of responsibility that had tied him to her since the first moment she had entered his life. He was protector, guardian, and companion all at once, every action precise, honed by years of survival and solitude. The storm intensified, wind lashing against broken walls, rain turning the yard into a chaotic blur of gray and brown. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the tension in stark relief. The rigid stance of the dog, the human crouched in a mix of fear and trust, the intruder poised uncertainly in the deluge. Mud sprayed with every movement, water seeping into every crack in the concrete. Yet the dog's focus did not falter. He barked, lunged, circled, a swirling embodiment of courage that refused compromise. And all the while, his eyes never left hers, checking, calculating, affirming. "I will not let harm touch you," she called out, voice trembling but firm, and the dog's attention shifted for the briefest instant, just enough to synchronize with her movement. Step by step, they navigated the chaotic yard together, instinct guiding him, trust guiding her. Every motion was a dialogue without words, a nudge here, a low growl there, a protective pivot to intercept. It was raw, elemental communication, loyalty expressed in muscle, presence, and gaze. Rain mixed with mud streaked across his coat, the storm whipping through him, as if it were a force testing not just strength, but heart, determination, and unbreakable bond. The intruder faltered, thrown by the relentless presence, the storm, the intensity of loyalty that radiated like a shield. The dog held his ground, powerful, unwavering, the embodiment of every lesson learned from years of waiting, enduring, observing, and surviving. In the chaos, he sensed the fragility of the human beside him, the pulse of fear and reliance, and he amplified his resolve. Every sinew, every tendon, every instinct converged into one perfect act, to guard, to defend, to survive together. The wind tore at his fur, rain stung his eyes, and the smell of ozone and wet earth filled his nostrils, but he did not flinch. He could not. She arrived quietly, barefoot now, the dampness of the morning rain still clinging to her hair and jacket. Her eyes, soft and warm, met his, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them, the quiet acknowledgement of survival, of trust, and of a bond forged in storm and solitude. He rose slowly to meet her, paws pressing into the softened earth, ears flicking as he approached. She extended her hand and he pressed his muzzle against it, a deliberate, intimate act of recognition and acceptance. No words were necessary. The language between them had been built over weeks of patient gestures, tentative trust, and shared vulnerability. The yard, once a canvas of decay, now felt alive. Moss and grass grew greener between the cracks, sunlight danced on broken glass, and the skeletal trees' branches swayed gently in the morning breeze. The house, though still battered and crumbling, seemed softened by the light, shadows retreating from corners once dominated by grief. He moved through the space with careful familiarity, sniffing the edges of the walls, circling the ruins as if marking the territory not as a sentinel of absence, but as a guardian of the life that had returned. She followed, walking slowly, sometimes kneeling to touch him, sometimes simply observing, her presence a warm, steady rhythm alongside the lingering pulse of his vigilance. Food had become a shared ritual of peace. She brought a small bowl, placing it down gently, water rippling with reflections of the sunlight and the soft flicker of leaves overhead. He sniffed, circled, and finally ate, muscles relaxing with each bite. She sat nearby, hands brushing wet soil aside, allowing him space but never leaving his side. This quiet harmony, shared meals, mutual observation, and small gestures of trust, was a testament to the transformation that had taken place. The storm had tested them, and they had emerged tethered together, not by obligation, but by choice, by understanding, and by loyalty that ran deeper than words could capture. Hours passed, and they moved together through the yard, exploring the house's shattered interior with cautious curiosity. Broken beams and jagged windows became a playground of rediscovery, each step measured yet infused with wonder. He sniffed every corner, nudged at the crumbling door, and occasionally lifted his gaze to meet hers, golden eyes reflecting sunlight and trust alike. She spoke softly, narrating small observations, laughing quietly when he startled at a falling leaf or a puddle that splashed under his paw. Her laughter was a balm, a sound he had once known and thought lost forever. The ruins, the wind, the distant city beyond the fence, they all became witnesses to the reclamation of connection, of the fragile, persistent joy that had returned to his world. Evening approached, painting the yard in amber and rose, shadows stretching long across broken concrete and moss-covered walls. He lay beside her, tail brushing her knee, head resting lightly against her arm, eyes half closed but alert. The warmth of the fading sun mixed with the quiet rhythm of shared breaths, creating a cocoon of safety and intimacy. He remembered nights of loneliness, cold, hunger, and waiting, but those memories no longer weighed him down. They had become part of the tapestry of who he was, now interwoven with new threads of companionship, trust, and quiet joy. Each exhale, each glance, each touch of her hand reminded him that loyalty had meaning not just in endurance, but in the act of choosing connection over solitude. The house behind them, battered yet enduring, seemed less like a prison of memory now, and more like a monument to resilience. Shattered windows reflected golden light, jagged beams softened by shadows and moss, and the air was rich with the sense of rain, earth, and life reclaimed. He walked the perimeter slowly, paws pressing into softened soil, nostrils flaring as he traced every scent that lingered from storm and survival alike. She followed, speaking softly, touching a wall, brushing debris aside, yet never intruding on his space. Their bond had become a delicate balance, a choreography of trust, observation, and presence, each moment a testament to the shared journey from fear to courage, isolation to companionship, shadow to light. As darkness fell, stars began to pierce the night sky, faint yet insistent against the deepening blue. He sat again beside her, ears angled toward distant sounds, but body relaxed in ways that had been impossible before. She reached out, hand resting on his neck, fingers brushing through wet fur, and he leaned into the touch, a quiet, profound acknowledgement of everything that had passed. The years of waiting, the storms weathered, the moments of fear, and the triumphs of trust. He was no longer a sentinel of absence, but a participant in life, a companion who had learned that loyalty and love were inseparable, and that the past, though never forgotten, need not define the future. The wind carried faint scents of life beyond the yard. Flowers blooming in forgotten gardens, distant streets bustling with unseen energy, and the soft rustle of leaves whispering promises of renewal. He lifted his head, eyes catching the faint glimmer of stars above, and in that quiet moment, he understood the beauty of existence, the interplay of shadow and light, fear and courage, solitude and connection. She whispered his name softly, a word infused with recognition and love, and he pressed his muzzle once more against her hand, a gesture simple yet profound, a seal of trust, and the culmination of everything that had brought them here. The night settled around them gently, wrapping the yard in a blanket of calm. The house, still scarred by time and storm, became a silent witness, its jagged edges softened by moonlight and shadow. He rose slowly, circling the space one last time before returning to her side, tail brushing against her legs in a rhythm of quiet joy. She laughed softly, words unnecessary, as he leaned into her presence, a living testament to resilience, loyalty, and the redemptive power of connection. They sat together in silence, letting the wind and distant city hum fill the space, hearts beating in tandem, breathing in the same calm that had once been so foreign to him. And as the moon climbed higher, casting silver light across moss and broken concrete, he lowered his head, ears relaxed, gaze soft yet watchful. He had survived storms, solitude, and loss. He had endured absence and grief. But now he was here, beside the one who had returned life to the yard, who had nurtured trust from the ruins, who had coaxed hope from years of darkness. He sighed softly, a long, slow exhale that carried relief, joy, and quiet pride. The light after long shadows was not just a promise. It was reality, fragile, shimmering, and utterly alive. And as he rested his head against her knee, watching the stars flicker through the broken roof and the moonlight touch the moss-covered walls, he allowed himself to feel the fullness of everything. Loyalty honored, courage tested, trust earned, and love reclaimed. The abandoned house, the street, the sky, and the rain-slicked earth all bore witness to the truth he had discovered. Even after darkness, after storms, after solitude, life could return, and with it, light that lasted.